When it comes to extremes in environments, I can think of no more inhospitable place than a desert. Now, if one is to face such a place, it would be ideal to be able to prepare appropriately, acquire the right amount of equipment, tools, and knowledge, and supplies. But such isn't always the case. As in, you'll see in this first case, sometimes all you can do is what you can find. Watch closely now as we follow one story of a hero who confronted the extremes in temperatures.
Walking out of a desert requires an incredible amount of determination, resourcefulness, and most importantly, luck. As much luck as Bob Nelson had after he was shot down over the desert in 1942. Bob managed to grab a few supplies before his plane blew up. Some tins of tomato juice, serve cool, a water bottle, torch and compass were all useful, as was Benzedrine, an amphetamine provided to keep him going with little food or sleep. But his crepe-soled desert boots weren't really up to the journey ahead. For 7 days, the only living things he saw were flies. During the heat of the day, he rested, walking only at night, signalling forlornly with his torch to try and attract aircraft.
Although a desert does present itself with certain particularly difficult situations, another extreme and challenging situation would be to be caught out on the open sea, and in the words of Stephen Callahan, another type of desert, or a watery desert, in other words. What would you do if you got caught in this situation? The second most extreme.
Surviving for minutes or even hours is one thing, but I'm fascinated by people who've managed to go beyond that. People like Steve Callahan, who survived for 2.5 months after being shipwrecked. Steve had been sailing since the age of 12, intent on a life of adventure. In 1982, he stocked his boat here in the Canaries before enjoying a last beer and setting out across the Atlantic.
And finally, in my opinion, the greatest example of a true survivor is that of Onoda Hiro and his incredibly long and fantastic journey in the wilderness of the Philippine Islands. Watch carefully as he manages to evade and survive enemy and environment for nearly 30 years.
One of the most famous was Hiroo Onoda. He was found in 1974, 29 years after going into hiding on the island of Lubang, about 200 kilometers from where I am. As part of his guerrilla warfare training, Onoda was taught to stay alive by any means necessary. When the Americans overran Lubang in 1945, most of the Japanese soldiers surrendered and 24 died in suicide raids. But Onoda went into hiding, saying later that he wasn't prepared to give himself up until his commanding officer ordered him to do so. The Japanese sent several search parties to look for him, but Onoda even managed to persuade himself that his elderly father's voice was a cunning imitation by Americans out to trick him, and he avoided all attempts at contact. He lived a nomadic lifestyle, building makeshift huts wherever he felt safest. To keep track of time, he observed the phases of the moon, and amazingly, after 30 years, he was only 6 days out. For food, Onoda made the most of the fruit and vegetables that grew wild, but he also rigged up ingenious snares. This is a simple noose for catching birds, and it's based on traps that he'd seen the islanders make. And this is a rat trap. The bait inside is connected by woven fibres to a trigger. When the rat takes the bait, it releases the trigger and the door falls down, trapping it inside. Occasionally, Onoda would also raid local farms to steal pigs or cows. For a taste of home, he would rig up a simple steamer using bamboo sticks. Any extra meat he had, he would smoke and preserve for later, working always by night to avoid detection. In the end, it was a lone Japanese adventurer who found him, but he wouldn't be persuaded the war was over until he was told so by his former commanding officer. So Major Yoshimi Taniguchi was sent to tell him to come out of hiding. So Hiroo Onoda's private war ended after nearly 30 years, but he'd only managed to carry on that long because he knew Lubang better than the locals and could always stay one step ahead of them.
When one gets caught in any kind of environment, you're not always prepared. The best thing you can do is, regardless where you go, wherever you travel, just down the road to school, or across the country, or across the globe to foreign countries, is always to have some sort of survival kit on you. And then, as you enter into the situation, the best thing you can do is to sit down, relax, gather your thoughts, assess your situation, your resources, your skills, and with a prayer in your heart, best attack the situation that you are confronted with. I hope you will be ready should you ever have to be faced with such an extreme situation.